Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Muslim Matters podcast, where we discuss everything under the sun that affects Muslims, such as faith, local and global politics, social media, sex education, civil rights, and family matters. All coming from a traditional Orthodox perspective. Subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle, Muslim Matters, and check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org.
Barakatuh, and welcome to the Muslim Matters podcast. I am your host, Zainab bint Yunus, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Siraj Muhammad, and today's guest, Sheikh Mohammad Elshinawy, a returning guest, alhamdulillah. Sheikh Mohammad Elshinawy is a graduate of English literature at Brooklyn College, New York City. He also studied at the College of Hadith at the Islamic University of Medina and is a graduate of and instructor of Islamic Studies at Mishkah University. He has translated major works for the International Islamic Publishing House, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, and Mishkah University. Sheikh Mohammed, welcome back to the show.
Well, khairan, thanks for having me.
So Sheikh Mohammed, you host a podcast series of your own, and it's titled Behind the Mimbar, Blueprints for a Better Masjid. And you've covered everything from unmosque Muslims to Imam crises, masjid management and mental health, and more. So tell us a little bit more about the series and why you started it.
In a nutshell, I promised myself to never be an imam, and that failed miserably. I got coaxed, pressured, gaslighted by my teacher, Dr. Hatem al-Hajj, into taking the position here at the Islamic Society of Allentown, or otherwise known as the Jesus Son of Mary Mosque, here in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I was told by him at some point after I bit the bullet and took the job that he asked me, how are things going? I have a request from you. And I'm like, absolutely. He's never asked for anything in his life from me. So he caught me off guard. I'm like, hey, Sheikh, anything. He said, I need you to stay in the community for 10 years. I was like,
that's quite a big ask.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily against it. I just never thought that far ahead in my life. And he said to me, listen, you will never have a meaningful impact in a community in less than 10 years. And you will benefit from them more than they will benefit from you. You'll be forced to learn certain things. You'll get mangled and reformed, restructured.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah, for sure. I understood that I needed to be part of a community, but from a safe distance. I needed to be in a relationship with the community, but on my terms. If I'm to pull a poor idea of marriage analogy. But it didn't work. And he reminded me that flying in and out of communities or being pro bono for communities, you'll give on your terms, not necessarily to their needs. And you're not going to change anyone's life with a charismatic speech. You'll convince them to want to change their life. But the tarbawi process, the pipeline of generations, what the Prophet ﷺ entrusted to us, is in the non-glamorous thick of year in and year out work. So anyway, I got to the community. I buckled down. I'm not saying I'm quitting, but I finished 10 years, 21 days ago.
Wow, mabruk.
Some of it be for Allah's sake. However, bringing it to the podcast, I realized a few years ago that 10 years is nothing. Even though I was emotionally exhausted, psychologically exhausted, of course, it comes with many irritants. And it's also very fulfilling in many ways. But I realized that so much of what I thought I'd get done in 10 years will not get done.
Yep.
It was very humbling. And my whole idea was always to be this model masjid that could, maybe a little bit arrogant, but export the model to other masajid, help us play catch up a little bit faster. This podcast was more a resignation to the reality of, let's just get the conversation started. Maybe other people can do other aspects of this faster than you. And the ajr, inshallah, will come back your way. It's our collective obligation to get our act together because the Muslims aren't waiting and the non-Muslims certainly aren't waiting. So that's
we
the idea
can't
of the
always
podcast.
do everything ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
I'm curious actually about something you said, if I could ask. You said there were certain things that you felt you wanted to get done, but were unable to get done. What would be an example of that?
There is so much. Part of it is I wanted to create a Muslim life center, create an Islamic village of sorts. By the way, a lot of the things that I wanted to do, I currently disagree with. And only by getting your hands dirty do you realize that your bright ideas, once you test them on the ground, are not as bright as you first thought.
We'll come back to that because I want to hear more about that as well.
Yeah. And so I was imagining that the masjid would be systematized and professionalized and pulling in talent left and right and unifying the communities. And unity is hard work. We just had a moonsighting conversation today on WhatsApp. So that's a big part of it. I thought getting people through the door would organically make them more committed to the deen, would naturally, organically improve their religiosity. And I think it's fair to say I was mistaken in believing that. It's a necessary step, but settling there is very short sighted. So that's of what I am reflecting on most recently.
I appreciate that. And I will say that one of the reasons I'm so invested in following the podcast is that I've had a lot of experience. My dad's an imam, been an imam for 30 years now. And so a lot of what you're sharing resonates, not because I've ever been an imam, obviously, but simply because I have observed this and I've been a part of community growth and development and things like that. And all these years later, I very much share a lot of the sentiments that you do. Now, for this episode, I want to talk a little bit more about starting from scratch, actually. So, how tiny Muslim communities can grow from the ground up in more than just numbers and physical institutions. So, a lot of the Behind the Minbar episodes, they assume an established community with bigger communities. And a lot of it is transferable in a lot of ways. There's always those basic principles, foundational principles that you can apply regardless. But I do want to shift our focus to those communities which are still very small and they haven't caught up to larger cities in terms of available funding or even just manpower for volunteers. And I'll be really transparent here. Like, my interest in this topic is because my hometown is a very small community on the west coast of Canada. Like, we have only one masjid still. And in many ways, we're still in a bit of a time warp. We're floating somewhere between the late 90s and the early 2000s. You're talking about a strongly prevalent immigrant back home mentality, combined with the few of us who were raised here in the West, dealing with petty masjid politics, the cliquishness amongst ethnic groups, the whole shebang. And I do know this is not unique to my community either. There's a lot of other smaller communities in Canada for sure, and I'm certain in certain regions of the States as well, that are going through very similar circumstances, dealing with a lot of the similar challenges. So, what would your first thoughts be about how such a community can start working towards becoming better, if not bigger?
Okay, if I'm going to start by being frank, I don't know if all the communities are going to be able to do that fast enough. And therefore, the same way all of us dabble with the hijrah question, like when do I cut my losses and not leave behind a generation that doesn't have an infrastructure to ensure it's Islam, that its
Yeah.
children will find their identity and their faith, regardless of what tomorrow brings. I think I need to say first that I am growing fond of a suggestion, a theory for Muslims in the diaspora, the scattered 1% of Muslims in America, for example, that we should be realistic. And I know not everyone has that luxury, but I do think we should probably all consider heavily making sacrifices now while we still can to get around, mobilizing our resources around the more active masjid communities. Let's say there's 4,000 masjids in America, which there are, maybe the most active 1,000 of them or something. And looking back can help you realize why this is potentially necessary. I visited the UK and I shared this story on the podcast maybe once or twice. The reason I've accepted the invitation for a tour in the UK is I wanted to see the community in the UK because they're like second, third generation. We're mostly first, second generation, or at least a majority of us.
Yeah.
Of course, African Americans have been here forever, but like the mass migration of the South Asians was 70s, 80s, the Arabs was 80s, 90s, and that's 2/3 of the Muslim community right now, roughly. So I wanted to see in the UK because they're like second, third, not first, second. What if you fast forward? What will our communities look like? Long story short, I wasn't able to do that, but Allah blessed me with meeting Mufti Abdurrahman Mangera on my last night there. And I explained to him that I had certain aspirations for coming here and I didn't get a chance to really explore and understand. He said, say no more. I was an imam in California for 9 years. I was like, okay, cool. It's apples and oranges. There's no comparison. People that went to America are a self-selected group of privilege that came because they could afford to come. They came to the land of milk and honey with milk and honey, or at least for the opportunity or the promise. And Islam was an afterthought. Like we got there, to the university that hired us or the hospital or whatever else, whatever corporate position we've landed. And then it's, oh, wait, how do I do this Jum'ah thing? Nearest masjid, 9 hours, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So it's an afterthought. So like you find a few like-minded individuals, you guys rent or buy out your little house on the prairie or your storefront office space. And then wait a minute, my kids are 16. How are they going to be Muslim? Let me build out an Islamic school. That takes a generation or two. And until now, our Islamic schools, by and large, are like strapped for resource because without government funding or mature endowments to generate revenue, you're working with a third of what the public school students get. The average public school student gets spent like 17K on them from tax money annually. Varies by state, but the average Islamic school tuition is what, 7K? Something's got to give. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's basically what happens. You're playing catch up. And are we going to be able to play catch up fast enough is a very scary thought. So that's my first appeal to everyone, that you left the Muslim ethos, even though we're all in a rebuild phase, even in the Muslim majority world, you're in the belly of the beast right now. Can you afford to not sacrifice and get close to a thriving masjid or a masjid that could start thriving faster with your help?
I will ask you one thing related to this. For the average person, totally get it. What would you say for people who, again, smaller communities where there has to be an imam who comes to show up and help lay the foundations for that community and be there? Again, to give context, my father is the very first imam in Victoria, the city that I live. And he had that existential question of, do I find a job overseas and live overseas in a Muslim country instead, or what? And his shuyukh told him, like, no, you have an obligation to go back. And we're talking, like I said, this is the late 90s. And the story that he always tells is when he showed up on summer vacation, he was still staying in Medina. And a man came to him and asked him a question related to tahara or salah. And this man did not realize or did not know that you have to do ghusl from janaba before you can pray. So this man had never known some of the basic rules of tahara. And so when he went back to Medina and shared this with his shuyukh, and they're like, you have to stay, you have to do this, because these are the farad of the deen that they don't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, subhanAllah. May Allah reward them immensely in ways that only they can. We are all faced with us religious leaders are faced with similar challenges in many respects, like even pivoting away from a masjid to a nearby masjid for a slightly better standard of living for my family and my children. We all live with the imposter syndrome of, how do I abandon my current community? Even the hijrah question, we deal with it too, right? Do I jump ship or not? But apparently the
Mhm.
captains are not allowed to jump ship until everyone else does first. So what do you do? I would say, if after compelling people to try to like coalesce around those with the highest likelihood of getting with the program in time, I would say everyone needs a why. Like many people who get caught up in some of what you've mentioned, the clickiness or the petty politics or sort of any form of bigotry or tribal sectarianism, whatever, politics, like wider society politics, national politics, they've lost the plot on the why, right? Like this idea that Muhammad ibn al-Qasim, rahimahullah, came to India 1300 years ago, and Islam's been in my family for 1300 years. And I show up on the day of judgment, and I'm the one who dropped the ball on Islam. My kids onwards are no longer Muslim. It's a very jarring reality. The idea that Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu came to the Middle East and brought Islam to much of the Middle East, and then like we got here, and within one generation, people should know the Pew Research numbers, and they're not the only ones. The Yaqeen and the FYI and others have similar independent sort of surveying with similar numbers, right? 23% of first-generation Muslim Americans no longer self-identify as Muslim. That means nearly 1 out of every 4. These are not people failing an Aqidah test, or let alone their Fard Ain. These are people who are saying, I am not Muslim. My parents were Muslim. My grandparents were Muslim, type thing. And so that is enough of a why. If a person doesn't have enough of a religious imperative to find that to be scary, then they should have parental instinct. Like this world, in a godless era, in a secular age, suffers so much without Islam. And do we not believe that Islam has the source of healing for our children and for wider society? So mobilizing people around the why, usually it's like the rallying call. We are under attack, right? People use that in principled and unprincipled ways. We're saying use it in principled ways. That would be how you not silence dissenters, but this is how you suppress distractions, right? From we need to like not give leftovers of our money. We need to not look at masajid as recreational. We need to be here regularly. Like I tell my community all the time, you need to live within 8 to 10 minutes of the masjid. Because if you don't, you're not going to be regular. And if you're not regular, you're probably not going to benefit much.
So I have a question. Maybe I'm rephrasing Zainab's question, but if you do have these smaller communities, and let's assume for a second they don't have access to larger ones or too far out, and they have no hope really of growing into one of those super mega masajid, what would be the items that you would prioritize and say, with these limited resources, they should focus on X, Y, Z, A, B, C as a community, and the things that maybe might be ideal, the things that you would want to have, we should be okay with letting go, knowing that we have these limited resources?
No, it's a wonderful question because I am a stickler about this subconscious expansionist appetite that a lot of mega masjids buy into. You see the mega church, especially in the South, the Bible Belt, and so on and so forth, and you think the masjid has to be comparable. There are actually Christians, Mormons, and otherwise who have seen the flaw in this model, that it actually does away with the intimacy and the warmth of a tight-knit community. The mega masjid, like the mega church, does go to those masajid, and many people will tell you, I miss, it's not just nostalgia, I miss the smaller iteration of this building. We have this big city feel now for Fajr and Isha. It's wonderful that more people are coming, but I don't necessarily know their names. So I'm less likely to start a conversation, figure out which one of us has kids of similar ages. It's a bond now, like the masjid being the place where you build lifelong friends. The likelihood decreases dramatically when it is such a huge operation or a huge facility. And so I would tell them, don't worry about it. It actually might be some hype. There might be some hype there. It's not as, there might be some copycatting there that's not as well thought out as you may think. There is some herd effect element at play here, in my opinion. And one way to think about it is that there's the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps are people, places, and programs. Many focus on the places. You're always so busy widening your place, your physical structure, that you don't have the quote unquote luxury of investing in people, right? The right talent, bringing and retaining the right talent, and in programs, in the actual initiatives. And subhanAllah, as Ustad Zainab mentioned earlier, it's like having the right leader in place is indispensable. Umar ibn Khattab's famous wish of, I wish, they're saying, I wish I had this amount of money and this amount of money to spend in the path of Allah and spread the light of Islam. And he says, I wish I had a room filled with the likes of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, right? That's what the Prophet ﷺ came. He came in and he built human beings, each one of them to go to a city of the world and says to get on my shoulders. And we see this. What are the thriving communities? Most of them are communities that have recruited talent, right? They aggressively recruited competent talent, the right talent. And so investing in people, like my masjid, and yaqeen, by the way, I often say this about yaqeen, so I don't speak too much about my masjid. Like I tell them, you guys actually, you may like yaqeen, but you may actually not know what makes yaqeen yaqeen. It is the back end. It is the talent they invest in on the marketing front, on the engineering front, on the infrastructure, right, and management front. You see the faces, but it's the infrastructure. And so the infrastructure, the heart of the community is the leadership. Religious, of course, but the executive and the managerial leadership as well. So I would tell them, focus on talent. People always get into this cycle. I'll tell you, Masajid often consult me on, are we big enough to get an imam yet? And I always tell them the question is wrong. You get an imam, and the imam will bring you the finances. He'll bring you the resources because he becomes the face of the masjid. He becomes the place of trust. Like I visited my masjid actually for 4 years as a volunteer. I would drive from Brooklyn, New York to Allentown, Pennsylvania, do like a family night, khutbah on a Friday night and whatever. When I actually moved there, I actually clocked it because I was anticipating it. Like, how long is it going to take for me to build some trust? These same people that I've been seeing for 4 years, it was only when they knew I was available and knew to expect me there 5-6 days a week, did they actually start opening up and saying, okay, my kid has a drug issue, or my marriage is on the rocks. I have this doubt about the faith, and so on and so forth. And then I become a source of trust for them. Then when you've earned that trust, then when they see the value, and when it's time to fundraise, people give based on relationships to begin with. That's the way people allocate resource. Muslim community is by and large, in most parts of the country, very wealthy. We've bought our homes, we've left behind generational wealth, we're major donors in many places. Like we're 1% of the population in New York City and Chicago, we're like 10, 12% of the physicians. We're generally an affluent community, a large segment of us. But where's the trust? One of the podcasts, we interviewed Qasim Mazhar, who's doing his master's degree in philanthropy in the nonprofit space. And he says that our mentors and our teachers, our professors, they tell us that they don't believe in donor fatigue. They believe in donor abuse. Just shut up and give me your money, or I'm back for money again once a year. That's the only time I approach you. And so invest is a huge deal. Even when we hired our youth director here, if I'm being honest, there was some skepticism. It's always a challenge because there's 5-10 parents that are really struggling with their teenager. They're the ones that want a youth director in every community. And then by the time you mobilize a critical mass, the kids are either better or worse or aged out, moved away. And so it's like a revolving door of interest. Now there's another group that wants the youth director. And so I wanted to make a fast move on it. I caught the pattern and I said, okay, listen, I told one of the parents, can you bring me 30 parents that are willing to pledge $1,000 towards a youth director? And I'll go to the board and I'll tell the board, let's create this position. We have half a year's salary. At the time, it was 60. Alhamdulillah, the salaries have been restructured. But let's create this position. And I already have pledges for half a year's salary. And I know that once the work starts, people are going to see its value. Alhamdulillah. We've hired a youth director. And then after that, they started saying, where's the sisters equivalent to the youth department? We hired a sisters youth coordinator. Now we upped the budget and sent our youth to Umrah and so on and so forth. So it's the whole classical wisdom of build it and they will come. You need someone to build it. So it starts trust, and that trust is the leadership. So people, then programs, more important than places. And this is not like a false dichotomy or trichotomy or whatever. Places are important. You need a suitable facility. Youth have an inferiority complex when the masjid looks and smells inferior, of course, but not at the expense of, not prioritized over the people and the programs. The Prophet ﷺ produces the best generation, and not a perfect analogy because our deen did say customs are authoritative, but he did have a masjid with a sandy floor and palm fibers up top for the roof, right?
Those are great starting points, especially the bit about not having an expansionist vision. And so going back to that, you're dealing with a small community and we're just thinking about how do we start with the bare minimum? And you had mentioned that for most of our communities, it started off with a very survival mindset, right? So whether people came as privileged immigrants or they came as refugees, there was just very much a sense of basic survival. Now, there's going to be communities that just haven't moved on from the survival mindset. What's your advice on moving from the survival perspective to the thriving perspective? Because that's what we call in social services, the trauma response, right? You're just constantly reacting to a state that existed in the past, even though your situation has changed now. And so at a community level, have you seen communities successfully move from that survival mindset to a thriving mindset? And what were the core principles or the core actions or steps that needed to be taken to go in that direction?
My best advice for that conundrum is sometimes it only comes from Allah to know when the sometimes are, by the way. It's like tawfiq. You really sometimes is unknown to the greatest scholar on earth. When do I stay and fight? And when do I bow out and invest elsewhere? But sometimes it is better just bow out and invest elsewhere. Sometimes you need to divide to unite. Sometimes it's just easier, instead of fixing from within, to build without becoming tribalistic and cultish and all that other stuff. Build something separate. And then others will see it and people gravitate towards success. If you do things right, people are going to want to be like you, even in their own skin, which is fine. We're not big enough, but we're going to hire an imam. So they hire an imam. All of a sudden, subhanallah, all these other people who are wondering about like the resourcing and they have the deficit mindset and all this, they're hiring imams. The smaller masjid hired an imam and it worked. And so modeling, I think, is a big part of this as well. I've grown up with many masajid who believe the presence of the youth is a liability, right? One of them came to me once and he wanted to start a YM chapter. They call them neighbor nets for those unfamiliar, different chapters around the country. And the bigger masjid with the nicer facility was very worried about their facility, like the chandelier and everything else. And so they canceled their event last minute. They approved it. Then WIF got up to maybe higher ups. And then they said, okay, no, we can't have an 11 p.m. event at the masjid with irresponsible youth. Mind you, 25 years old sometimes. So he came to me and he was really burnt out. And he's just, Sheikh, I need advice. I'm like really angry right now. I told him, look, we don't have a gymnasium. We don't have anything. But if you want, I can try to get you permission to use the musalla. And so I got it. It's not because we're that much better. Right now, we're suffering from growing pains. But it's because we were smaller then that I was able to make a direct phone call to the head of security. And he said, okay, fine, no big deal. We have surveillance cameras. If anything happens, just give me one point of contact. Anyway, pushes it through. On the spot, I give him the green light and they're able to salvage their event.
Mm-hmm.
Right after they have the sort of the late night dodgeball shenanigans, he gets a call from the big masjid saying, why are you dividing the units?
Yeah,
Why are you
I
both?
think that's a
That's great.
consistent problem with anybody who tries
Yeah,
do
yeah.
their own thing.
So I told him, he came back to me and now he feels really guilty because he wants to go to the place with the gymnasium. But at the same time, I went to bat for him. So he came to me, he's like, he's tiptoeing around it, trying to be respectful. I'm like, listen, go, enjoy the facility, but do 1 week with them, 1 week with us. So both of us know that you have options. I don't worship my brand. I don't worship my masjid. My masjid is a vehicle by which we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, I care about the youth being in Allah's house. I know what's going on outside. So both of them need to know you have leverage so no one shuts the door in your face. If every masjid wants to be looked at as the youth masjid and the parents like the masjid and become potential donors and supporters for the masjid, and I don't mean the masjid are greedy, but like they do go to sleep at night worrying about this stuff.
Yeah.
So leverage it.
It's definitely a
And
scarcity mindset with our masajid.
Yeah, so sometimes just modeling and just going through is the best way. Let people catch up.
So shifting from that,
Without, and it's very important. I'm so sorry to cut you off,
Oh.
but it's very important that when you do this in the most magnanimous way possible, right? You
Mhm.
got to go out of your way to preempt suspicions that will arise that you're a bad faith contender.
yeah. I think that's sometimes going to be impossible. People are always going to have their petty politics. But yeah, no, I definitely agree that you got to do it in as smart a way as possible. But that's not going to necessarily protect you from suspicions and things. But let's say somebody splits off and starts their own thing, but then you're still dealing with the same, essentially, the group of people, right? Your community is still going to consist of the same people. And a very important part of being able to do things a different way is to have a vision. And it's not enough for one person to have that vision. You have to have, how do you get the community to buy into that vision or even the concept of a vision?
Okay, here's the story. Incoming. So we said leadership is important, and leaders, they chart the vision. But it's really important that you don't become like a dictator, whether a benevolent dictator or not. You
Mhm.
don't become a dictator because like it's not just about fundraising. What they say in fundraising, when you want money, you ask for advice because that gives people a sense of ownership that they're actually driving with you, and therefore they feel responsible to support you. And if you want advice, ask for money. Go ask that guy is the advice I'm going to give you. If you ask me you just ask me for money. So buy-in, ownership, sense of belonging, true belonging, that's important. But not everyone's going to be making the decision. At the end of the day, the leaders have the burden of decision making, and they need to be cognizant of the needs of their community and the sensibilities or sensitivities also of the community. But they're going to have to compel or persuade their community as to why this is the best decision. I do that day in, day out.
What's
Let
your
me,
secrets?
part of it is the sense of urgency around like maintaining the faith across the generations. But let me tell you a funny story that when we changed the masjid's name to Jesus Son of Mary Mosque, I mean, I'm consulting, I'm huddling with people whose visionary minds I admire and benefit from. Mashura is indispensable. hey man, we should call it the Jesus Son of Mary Mosque. That's a great, we've seen it in one or two other places around the country. It's working. So I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to propose it to the board. The board says, no, the community is going to go crazy. You can't change. They have sentimental attachment to their like founding name. And even though we had the clunkiest like acronym out there, IECPA, right? You couldn't even say it like IECPA and stuff. And so what did I do? I printed it and like I went and bought a logo. I went to a brand designer. He created me a logo, designs it. I pay for it out of pocket, I think. And then I print it on a big banner and I fold the banner in half, like I conceal it. And then mid Tarawih, basically open it, surprise, the unveil. I say, guys, what do you think of this? But before you answer, here's the idea. We're in Pennsylvania. We're in Christian country. And this will be an amazing conversation starter. I've seen it work in New York City. I've seen it work in Syracuse. And this is our obligation. It is not enough that we don't hide our Islam. I hope none of us are hiding our Islam, but we need to be sharing our Islam. And the number one reason why Christians become Muslim, it starts with them discovering that we believe and revere Jesus. Of course, I see their eyes. People are like, oh, it's really fascinating. No skin off my back either, right? You're the sheikh in the masjid. If anybody's getting shot, it's going to be you. We're at work. So everyone's like all pros, no cons. I said, but I will not do this unless we get a strong majority agreeing. So show of hands, you get like 99% hands. I'm walking out of the masjid after we finished Tarawih. This brother brings me his daughter, 19-year-old sister. Allah bless her. Good sister. She was actually going to be a lawyer. And she should have been a lawyer. She's very well spoken and not argumentative in the combative sense, but she makes a strong argument for her feelings always. A strong, rational argument for her feeling always. Very assertive, eloquent, articulate. She comes to me and she's like, you're so sneaky, Sheikh. I was like, what? He goes, you act like that was an unbiased. I was like, it's not. Who said I have my bias? I was trying to convince people of my perspective. She goes, I know what you did there. And she's like, don't get me wrong, I like the name, but that was not a sort of a genuine look at people's opinions. I was like, yeah, I was guiding their opinions along. And I feel like that's my responsibility. I can't unsee what I saw of like docile masjids or like youth. Like I spent the last 20 years of my life getting phone calls about youth leaving the deen. No confidence or maybe no conviction to begin with in Islam. So I can't unsee that. I got to speak my conscience. So that's our job, to consult and don't get all narcissistic about it, but guide our communities and their vision.
So it's got to be the leaders who come up with the foundations of that vision and then pull the people along, as it were.
Yeah. And also the experts, right? Our brother Qasim Mazhar, I mentioned earlier about fundraising. I disagreed with him 3 years in a row on what our goals should be. I felt like they were way too ambitious. But he knows statistically, he knows factually how people give. They give a fraction of their savings. So he sees the numbers and he sees right through them. He says, this is actually nothing. If our community gives this, they can actually give that. And every year I'm like, I don't know, man, this is going to backfire. And I told him after 3 years in a row of reaching our target, I told him, Akhi, formal apology, I will never disagree with you again. So you got to give the bread to its baker. It's really important. The Prophet ﷺ said, you are more versed in the affairs of your dunya. Respect discipline, respect specialization, respect expertise, give the bread to its baker, get some consultants. It's not just the sheikh. Our world is far more complex than to think you could do without a multidisciplinary approach.
Along the lines of what you just mentioned, this triggered something that just happened recently in my local mosque. It's one of the bigger, I don't want to say mega masjid, but it's getting there. They have a new board of trustees, and he's a younger guy, is the president. He stood up and he said, we don't want to do any more fundraising every single night during Tarawih in Ramadan, especially the last 10 nights. What we want to do is just limit it to one night because we think donors are fatigued. And then he confessed that even he's fatigued and he never comes to Tarawih at the masjid at this masjid anyway, he goes to another one because of how much fundraising happens during that time. I said, well, we're going to try to get more recurring donations. We think that's long-term more sustainable. We have studies around that. What would you say to that type of reaction to quote unquote donor fatigue?
I would consider it being able to read the room. I think there would be a landslide concurrence on every single night being a bit overwhelming. So yeah, I would commend, and even if it's not the case across the board in other masajid, then other masajid should not just copycat. Do a pulse check on your community. Ask questions. We survey, not as much as we should, but we try to leverage technology. Like sometimes one of the things we do at the masjid is a Mentimeter For those unfamiliar, it's literally a QR and you vote on 1 or 2 questions, takes 30 seconds literally, and you see the results in real time on the projection screen. People feel very happy. And when they see a decision was made because they contributed to it, and they don't get upset when they saw that most people don't want what they want. So data-driven, you look objective, you look impartial. That's mulk, right? That strong civilizations are predicated on justice, on equity.
So that's some interesting advice along both the vision building and the fundraising. I'll be keeping that in mind, inshallah. Backtracking a little bit, you're talking about Sheikh Khalid told you stay in the community for 10 years and that's when you're going to be able to have the impact. What advice do you have for new imams? Fresh graduates, it's their first imam job ever. They're being put into a new community that's not their hometown, or even if it is their hometown. Like growing up as a kid in a community is very different than coming in as the imam. And I've observed a couple imams who have come to the community and it was their first time, and I've got my own thoughts on that, but I want to hear from you first.
So half of the masajid of America don't have imams. The other half have imams, but they probably only have an imam, which means that they need more than an imam. They need like a prophet. As Dr. Muhammad Abu Talib says, you think you want an imam, but if you think about what you're expecting of this imam, it is absolutely bonkers. I used to say that what kind of hospital runs on one physician? But it's actually way worse than that. Dr. Muhammad Abu Talib actually has this nice illustration. He says, people don't come to the masjid in Muslim majority countries to do Hajj and Umrah. There's a ministry of Hajj and Umrah. They don't come to the masjid when someone dies. There's like a health and death ministry for funeral and whatnot. He says people don't come to the masjid for education. There's a department of education. There's a ministry. And these are all government-funded like institutions, national institutions, or at least like provincial, city-based institutions. He says they come to the masjid for all of that. 13, he counted, ministries get funneled into a masjid, actually on the head of the imam. So I'm extremely sympathetic to the difficulty, the martyrdom, the silent martyrdom of the men and women who are trying to lead masajid. It's usually an imam. And so I would tell them you're not doing anyone a favor by burning out. Most imams will burn out. So you need to consult others in the space. It'll be cathartic, therapeutic, but it won't just be that. It'll also be enlightening on sort of boundaries and ways to balance so that you don't burn out. Because you also want to be good at something, not like half-baked at everything or like incapable of being anything but suboptimal or mediocre at best at everything. No, you want to excel somewhere. And you look at the imams, for example, that have excelled around the United States, and I don't want to mention names, but you all know who they are, those you admire. Most of them have a few qualities. Of them is that they have formal traditional training, right? They're really well trained in the Islamic disciplines. Number two, they lean into their strengths and they don't get baited away from them. Like they know their limits, and so they excel at what they're good at. Number three, they don't stop at formal classical Islamic scholarship, because that turns you into what? It turns you into a teacher, turns you into a researcher. That's it. It doesn't make you a pastoral leader, an administrative leader. These are procedural, these are different issues. And so they went into sort of, if they're going to be in the communal space, they added to their skill set. They got a second degree or a certification or learned English, right? But the point is they realized that I don't have the package yet to be an imam just because I have formal Islamic scholarly training, scholastic sort of training. So yes, get connected. Don't die. Don't shrivel up and die on an island. Connect with your brothers and your sisters. Get input, get advice. I don't have much time, free time, but I prioritize when an imam tells me, like, here's what the contract they're giving me, any feedback before I sign it. And
that's a good one. That's a really good one, especially because I know some organizations are known for muzzling their imams through their contracts.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I've heard different ways to try to solution for this, and I don't think we're there yet. For example, over and over again, I've heard the issue of unionizing imama, to whether we agree with that or not from an ethical perspective. Is that doable? I'm not sure it's doable. What leverage do imams have right now? And also, imams have extreme job security in the sense that there's so much vacancy, I can just leave and go to other places. So why would I join a union to protect my job for me?
Yeah.
So the big picture of the need for a union does have other benefits, but it's not easily communicated that this is good for the greater good, if you believe in it to begin with, morally speaking. So I think the best way is for us to exchange notes, to share notes and exchange best practices and help each other. I'm not the only person who does this, obviously, but I know imams in general. We should benefit from each other's advice, shorten each other's learning curves, help each other stay afloat.
Yes, a type of mentorship essentially. And just out of curiosity, are there any formal imam mentorship programs that you know of? So I'm thinking about the fact that in social worker training, as I'm doing, we have to do practicums. We have to spend time in organizations. We have to spend time with the experts, with supervisors who coach us through what does this look like outside of the theory in the reality. Is
I
there
don't know.
something like
I
that?
don't know of any. I know they escape me some of the names of the organizations, but they seem to be more, and this is very needed, essential, but more of the life coaching of an imam, managing sort of the myriad of responsibilities in their personal, professional life. But formal mentorship, like an amount of hours under a senior imam or within a particular program, I'd love to see someone create something like this. I'm not personally familiar with anything on the ground
Okay.
like that. I know some universities in general, the seminaries in general are starting to incorporate time management, leadership, but what else? Psychology, da'wah methodology, things of this nature. Alhamdulillah, it's getting there.
Yeah, I asked this just because it's very interesting to me seeing, again, fresh graduates coming out of Medina University or wherever. And I'll tell you a story now. A while back in our community, my father was overseas at the time, but I was back here in Victoria. My brother was back here, and a new imam came to the community. He had just graduated from Medina. And we said, okay, khalas, let's sit down with him, let's chat with him, let him know like what the vibes are in this community, the history of this community, just give him some foundational context to know what he's getting into. And we tell him all this, and we tell him we're here to support you. We want to help the community grow and develop in the best way possible. Here's our community's top 3 concerns and issues that we have witnessed, like growing up here and being part of the volunteers and that kind of thing. And his response was, "Don't worry, I'm gonna fix the community with its aqidah." And my brother and I just looked at each other and we're like, "All right then," because you're very right about the part where when you study with your traditional qualifications, that's great in the sense that it is giving you these scholarly qualifications to lead the salah and answer fiqh questions or aqidah questions or whatever. But it does not qualify you to lead a community the way that imam positions are essentially set up here in the West. As Muslims in a non-Muslim country, in a non-Muslim society, where people are coming to the masjid not really for salah, they're coming for crises, they're coming for weddings, they're coming for funerals, they're coming for births, they're coming with everything and anything that's mostly not the salah and mostly not fiqh questions either, because somebody could show up and be like, hey, I have this question about divorce, but is it really about the divorce or is it about the big, messy divorce story? Or, hey, question about, is this wajib for my kids? But really is the question about that. No, it's really about the family history and the track that their kid is going down and what do they do. And really they just need parenting advice or crisis counseling, that kind of thing. And so I feel like it's super important that when somebody accepts the job position of an imam, they understand that it's not just leading the salah and answering fiqh questions, and that you already need to have an understanding of what this job entails, especially for smaller communities, because if there's literally no other imam and there is no other masjid, there is nowhere for people to turn to, you are going to be that one sole resource that they have for these issues. And if you don't come in prepared for that, you're not going to last. And that's exactly what happened. We've had a track record of multiple imams coming and going, and we literally just got another one like maybe a couple of months ago. And inshallah, I wish him the best. He's been an imam somewhere else, so that's a better start than showing up fresh. But just that piece of advice around if you are a new imam and this is your first time ever, like what are the top 3 things going to be? Like you did mention, obviously, furthering your education, but what would you say are those top 3 priorities that a brand new imam should have when he accepts that imam job and he's showing up in the community for the first time?
Context, right? Even the fiqh might be off, right? Because the hukm, divine injunction, will not change, but its application can vary. The fatwa, if you will, right? When the Prophet ﷺ, we all know this, and we should remind each other of this, when he said to Aisha radiallahu anha, were your people not recently mushrikeen, I would have tore down the Kaaba and restored it, rebuilt it upon the qawa'id of Ibrahim alayhi salam, because your people ran out of funding, and so they made the Kaaba smaller than it originally was, and so on and so forth. And so knowing when, picking your battle, it's huge. Understanding that people are on the brink of their faith, and just accepting that. You don't want to put them under the impression that you feel like you're suspecting their lack of faith, but you need to operate with that triaging in mind. Why do people pick a faith? They pick a faith by association more than anything else. And then after that, by persuasion, if they are given enough persuasive elements, like sound knowledge. And then after that, it's faith by experience. Like you invite them to worship Allah Azza wa Jal and have their own personal experience, the sweetness of faith. That is when they have an ownership of their faith. But when you realize, how many people are leaving Islam, you realize that the people in the masjid are actually 20% of your community on average. If you do the numbers, those who attend Jumu'ah and Eid are roughly 20-25% of the Muslims in your radius.
Yeah.
And those who pray Jumu'ah don't necessarily pray more than Jumu'ah. They may not be praying their 5. And so that context is very eye-opening. Like anyone who has the traditional training, once they're convinced of this context, they operate a little bit differently. Mentions an incredible story to remind of this point. He says he was raised in like an ultra-conservative society, right? He was like raised in Kuwait his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got an upgrade on his conservatism with Medina. He goes to Medina and studies and becomes valedictorian of Medina. And then he goes up to Unayza, studying with Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah for a few years. And then the war in Bosnia settles down and the rebuild starts. And Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah is among those who nominated competent da'wah workers to go out to Bosnia and help with the da'wah out there. So Sheikh Yasser mentions that when I went to Bosnia, I was stuck because I felt this imposter syndrome of I'm sitting in gatherings with men and women all the time, tight spaces, teaching them aqidah, but they're not wearing hijab, they're socializing on the way in, on the way out. And he said, so I couldn't wait to get back to Medina. He said to complain to the Sheikh, I feel like a hypocrite, I'm munafiq, that I'm not speaking uncomfortable truths and just saying it how it is and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he told them, yeah, of course, ikhtilat, the mixing of between the genders is haram. Well, how can you be teaching the deen while violating it at the same time? This is what Shaykh Uthaymeen said to him. He said to him, you can't put up a divider. He said, Shaykh, we tried. They won't come. He said, what's so important, like that you're teaching them that we care if they come or not? Is it a big deal? He said, no, Shaykh, we're talking about ABCs. These people don't know. They will tell you, I don't know the difference between myself and my Christian neighbor. I don't know.
Yeah.
So at the time, the communism its residue was still upon the hearts and minds. And so Amir rahimahullah said to him when he heard that, he was caught off guard. And he said to him, what is the point of hijab if you don't have tawheed? Priorities change now, right? The context changes. And so the context is a huge factor. So I would say fellowship of fellow imams, context of the American Muslim, and number 3, the context of your community. Like what is and isn't happening here. Don't get pulled into an echo chamber, because there can be pockets of your community who want to take you in a certain direction, right?
Here's a question.
Everyone's-
Seeing that you mentioned, I'm telling you, go to this community, stay there for 10 years, and you were volunteering for 4 years before that. Did you have people who sat you down and were like, here, let me give you the community history? Or did you just have to figure it all out on your own?
No, I had, alhamdulillah, people that were wonderful mentors, founders, current and former board members. You also need to remember that people share a story from their perspective. We reconstruct our memories sometimes also. We focus on what matters most to us sometimes. And so you want to get as sweeping an analysis as possible of your community, because it's very hard for people to notice their own blind spots, even us, right?
Right, of course.
But we can notice other people's blind spots by cross-referencing. And so this is something we should do.
So
Sheikh, I have a
eventually,
question. In terms of just the day-to-day, how would you recommend that you go about developing that context? What would be the practices that they should do to develop that context and to harden that analysis?
So same but different. I don't know too much about him, so I hope he's not like a monster or a Zionist or something. But this Simon Sinek guy who gives lots of like business guru advice for self-made entrepreneurs or whatnot. I've come across a few nice clips from him. I guess he got pulled into my algorithm. And one of the things he says that I tell all sort of new C-level or sort of executive leadership, when they get positions, they are not allowed to speak in the board meeting for 3 months. He says because everyone shows up and they're always over speaking and prematurely opining without knowing what's happening, because they're trying to prove themselves. They're like their subconscious telling them, I need to prove to the people that I am qualified. And he says, what you need to get through your head is, we hired you because we think you're qualified. Stop trying to prove your qualification. You're hired. Now listen. So I would literally schedule, it doesn't have to be forceful, but I would literally schedule time to tell people, I'd love to get to know you. I'd love to understand a little bit of context about this community. There were people, imams, I know real stories of imams who got deported because they rubbed people the wrong way, because they were listening to particular individuals only who recruited them and brought them into the country and into that community, right? And so they hit a bullseye on the wrong target. They were preaching in a way that was oblivious to the sensitivities of the community around them. And so the community like reported them of radicalization, of being radical. And so
Ouch.
you just schedule meetings with people and benefit from the wealth of wisdom all around you, and absorb and continue to ask Allah Azza wa Jal for guidance and take it one step at a time.
That's helpful. I hope that any prospective imams listening to this will take that to
No,
heart.
subhanAllah, I hope respective imams do that. The Prophet ﷺ is told by Musa alayhi salam, trust me, I've tried people, they're not going to do it.
I relate with
Yeah.
Musa a lot of the time.
Get a reduction. And Musa alayhi salam is the messenger of strong willpower, right? He is the icon of Ulul Azm, if you will, after our Prophet ﷺ. He's framed for us as this man of great determination, resolve, and strength. He's saying, we can't expect people to have resolve and strength. Ask Allah for another reduction. Ask him for another reduction. And so there is a religious mandate on us to benefit from human experience. Where you have the hadith of La yuldagh al-mu'min, the believer is not stung from the same hole twice. That's human experience, right? Later, the Arab would say, like, the prosperous person is the one that can benefit from others, takes a lesson from others. He doesn't have to commit the same mistake. He doesn't have to commit the mistake himself. That's what separates prosperous people from people that are just punching bags, right? People that are dragged through the mud unnecessarily.
It's interesting you brought up the example of Musa alayhi salam, because I always thought, even after it was reduced to 5 salah, he still asked for a reduction. And of course, we didn't get that reduction. But it seemed to turn out that he was still right anyway. So I'm just thinking of this conversation about the imam as well, right? There may be a point where the imam does need to push back a little bit, even after getting all that information. Where would the imam make the determination, and how would he navigate that sort of situation?
That is true. At the end of the day, you're going to have an opinion. You can't have humility ad infinitum. Like, it's just, right? Like, I'm not asserting that I am more knowledgeable than mujtahid imams, but at the end of the day, I'm going to have an opinion, or else we'll just fall into decision paralysis, right? So they want to make sure they do their due diligence so that they are between the two poles of 2 rewards and 1 reward for their ijtihad, as the hadith says, right? If you're right, you get 2 rewards, and you're wrong, you get 1 reward. Or between being rewarded and being forgiven, if you will. Like, they want to put themselves in safe territory. The safe territory is that. To not go in blind, to not underestimate the complexity of modern life and the scattered 1%, as I often like to call it. That's it. They're going to have to make their decision. Like I said, with the example of the naming of the masjid, and I have many examples of this. I can't sit there and wonder forever. I don't have like lifetimes of investigative bandwidth. No, you try your best and you ask and you own it when you make a mistake. You be ready that this is not my deen. This is not my community. This is a responsibility I'm upholding for Allah Azza wa Jal. And if I make a mistake, I'm not going to double down. Allah deserves more. The Muslims deserve more.
Yeah, I thought the way you influenced the community was very creative. And I empathize with the sister who said that was sneaky or felt that was sneaky. But it was good in the sense that you were able to help them see the vision of what you had in mind, both by explaining it to them as well as literally showing them like a visual aid so they could see exactly what it would look like. Do you have any other interesting influence techniques that you use?
Honestly, picking your battles in the sense of trying to use the sheikh card out of place. One of the reasons why I was very fond of moving to this community is that because their previous imam, it was a very rough divorce, and I was floored by how they handled it. I was, remember, volunteering for 4 years. I helped recruit this imam for them, and there was a fallout essentially over something that should not have caused the fallout. And they were accused of like horrible things, and there was a near upheaval, and they were dignified, so objective, so big picture about it that I'm like, man, I've never seen this anywhere else. So when they pressed me to move, because they've been asking me to move for years, then when my father, I would say I was taking care of my dad, and the last 3 years of his life were very difficult, rahimahullah, with Parkinson's. When he finally passed, they didn't ask immediately. They respectfully waited 6 months, but then they pressed me to come, and I felt guilty, and then I gave it to Sheikh Hatem, and I told him, like, I'm going to follow whatever you think is best, and he told me to go. But that was on the way out. They needed an imam now more than ever because they just lost their imam, and they dealt with it in this way. So I assumed they love me as much as I love them. And they did. But our masjid burned down, actually, as soon as I came. Good thing Muslims don't believe in bad luck. They showed up, the masjid burned down.
That, huh?
Yeah. No bad omen. And so we were homeless, like the community was homeless. We were praying in a Presbyterian church, a small house on a hill somewhere, things like this, looking for a place. We finally find a place, like by the time we get through the door, it would have been like 8-9 months later. It was very tough. Then we had to close again for construction. So we were praying Jumu'ah in a church effectively for a year and a half, 2 years. But when they found this new place, our current facility, they brought me over and they asked me my opinion, the board. And I said to them, like, it's a very hard decision. It's pros and cons. This place is like 10x the potential of our previous place. It was the old sort of grandfathered stone cathedrals. That was the old masjid that burned down. Bought as is. You weren't allowed to touch it, right? You couldn't renovate. And so this is a huge upgrade, but at the same time, it decenters the community, right? Like, it's not exactly where everyone came to live around the masjid. So it's a hard one. I told them, but to be honest, like, I thank Allah that the decision is not mine, it's yours. And they're like, no, we need to know what you think. And I'm like, honestly, we had an agreement. The agreement was that I have the veto on sort of religious stuff, and you guys have the veto on administrative stuff when I came here from day one. And I'm a team player, and I stand by my word, and I'm going to respect your decision and defend it. Defend your authority to make that decision. But my recommendation to you is go find the core volunteers and make sure they're comfortable, because, you need them. You need buy-in from them at least, because they don't live here. They live on the other side of town, if you will. It's like a 15, 20-minute drive. So they wouldn't budge. They're like, no, are you against this? So it started registering like, oh my God, they're afraid that I'm going to flip the table on them. And so I'm like, I'm telling you, I'm with you. All hands on deck. We're a community. And so the president of the board, I saw something like click in his eye, got like glassy eyed, and he grabbed me and tried to kiss me on the head. For Arabs, that's a really big thing. I didn't let him, of course, but it hit me. I'm like, oh my God, he was afraid of me. And since that day, they basically, even though technically, contractually not the case, they let me in on every decision. And I continue to usually not take it. But where did that trust come from? The fact that I'm not overplaying my card. I'm not the Sultan and the Khalifa. When like the Mongol Sultan told him, like, I hear you're after my throne. He said to him, Ana Rajul, I'm a clergyman, not a statesman. So that idea of giving people room to feel like they actually own, like the teenager, right? He has to actually feel like he's driving to feel like he made the mistake. And so likewise, to allow people to feel a sense of ownership and autonomy is a big way to persuade them, right? Like when you don't what do you say, volunteer your advice all the time and get all uncomfortable and impositional about it, you're actually given more room to share your advice. I don't know if that's useful, but
No,
I
that's
just
actually very excellent advice. I, given that the number of years you're there, I'd also imagine that you showing up day in and day out, being there for the community, probably also had something of an impact. Yes.
for sure, masjid goers are generally good people. So yeah, they're appreciative, no doubt. It was just, subhanAllah, I thought already that I'm the imam and like people have their guard down towards me. If they're not loyal to me, they at least like me. But seeing that, I was like, wow, man, imams need to realize they don't have the real estate in everyone's heart as much as they think. And even with the khutbah, like one of the epiphanies for me is that one time I gave a series or like just 2, 3, 4 talks about the virtues of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. It's a treatise from Imam Nasa'i about the virtues of Ali. And so I just happened to come across it and wanted to share it with the community. So I summarized it for them. I realized there's Shia in my crowd. And I was just like, how did I ever think there wasn't? Like, why do I live in a bubble? I'm telling myself, why do I live in such a bubble? There are many people in your masjid who don't necessarily like you, not necessarily ideologically agree with you. It's just that Jum'ah is wajib, for instance, and you're the only place they can get to in their lunch break. And so I think that has been very helpful in my sort of attempts to lead a community, is to realize that you're an imam. They do appreciate you generally. Most people appreciate you, but you may not be what you think. The world doesn't revolve around you, neither does the masjid. And the more we embrace that, I think the more helpful we can be to bringing our communities to a thriving point. Wallahu alam.
As long as they didn't think that you disagreeing with them would bring them bad luck.
Yeah, right? Now they know. Watch the words around.
Now, I really appreciate all this advice. I think it's very practical, especially around the bit for imams, because I think that's so important. I really feel just, again, based purely off of observation, Vancouver, Victoria, that kind of thing, where there is just so little preparation for the realities of what leading a community is like. And unfortunately, there are some of those who have inherited like narrow ideas of what a masjid should be or how it should operate. As you said, certain communities are not open to having kids in the masjid. But we know that if we don't establish those emotional ties and connections between kids in the masajid at a very young age, you're already halfway to losing them. And there's no emotional tug or network for them to fall back on during harder times when they're going through tougher times than just being toddlers. And then the bit about utilizing the imam card sparingly but effectively, also very important. I think that this idea of course, I'm the imam, of course, I get the last say. That's definitely something that's got to be balanced out with, as you said, don't be a dictator to your community. And that's going to play a massive role in how the community responds and the community develops trust. And
Oh,
after
yeah.
the,
I have one more story
yeah,
that
let's hear it.
really was heartfelt to me. And I know it's going to sound like self promotion, but I'll tell you the real reason why I did this. So we had rented a place, a gymnasium for Eid, like a Eid festival, carnival or something. And there's this one brother who was pretty jaded by the community. There's been a past, and understandable, and he was rubbed the wrong way, and maybe he was in fact mistreated. And like he decided to volunteer to help shuttling some people from the masjid parking to the carnival place because there wasn't enough parking there. So I jumped in. I said, "Can I help you?" And I started using my car, and I'm shuttling the whole day people back and forth, right? And I'm the imam of the masjid. So for him, he's blown away. My niyyah, by the way, was not like sincere at all. I hate loud music. There was nasheed in place. I was looking for any excuse to not be in that building, and my kids wanted to be in the building. So I said, you know what? Here's my excuse. I'm gonna be a van shuttle guy today. So he sent me this long message of, you have no idea what it means, like to see the leader of our community, like doing labor and stuff. And I don't know why. It just keeps echoing in me that we need to build clout. We need to build traction. He was al-Amin, and Allah had him wait 40 years before he sent him. And even then he met resistance, right? Not everybody was ready right away.
That's a
Anyway,
really important story that ties a lot to advice that I've heard my father give as well, and that I've seen him do. And contrasting that actually with another story that wasn't so positive and highlighted basically a what not to do. So essentially another Medina grad, and he is invited to become imam of a masjid here in BC. And a few months pass, and the community is not very happy. And Masjid uncle calls up my dad and says, "Look, I can see why they're not happy." And part of that is because the imam goes to this uncle who's like on the board. He's been around the community for ages, so this Amma was like an old timer. And he tells Amma, "What's wrong with this community? Why are they not lining up to say salam to me after Salat al-Jum'ah?" And I was shook because I was like, wait a second. I would have assumed that anyone who is being put in this position of imamship, it really should reflect a model of servant leadership. First step is you're the new person in the community. You are the imam, of course, but you should be the one who's approaching the community members. You should be the one initiating the salam, especially with elders, right? You should not be as a youth at that point, like 25, 26, freshly graduated, like I said. You shouldn't be sitting there with a sense of entitlement of, I'm the imam, everybody come to me, big up me. It needs to be reversed so that people understand and you understand what your role is, again, as a servant leader, that the dawah and the community leadership is not in promoting yourself or giving yourself a special status, but in how you can serve the community so that they can improve and they can do better. And they're going to trust you and they're going to appreciate you. And in fact, they are going to respect you more when they see that you are already giving them respect, when they see that you are going to the elders of the community and asking them for their thoughts and their advice. And they're not shuyukh, they're not alims, they're not whatever. They're just a masjid uncle who's been around for 20 years. Why not ask him about what he's seen in the community? Why not sit with the aunties and ask them for what concerns they have? Why not sit with the youth and be like, hey guys, like, what are the things that are bothering you, instead of just lecturing? And I feel like a lot of people, once you've been in dawah for a while as a volunteer or behind the scenes or associated with an imam who's been around for a long time, you pick these things up along the way. But it's really important to establish these foundational bits and pieces and the philosophy of servant leadership to these potential imams even before they get the job, before they accept the job, or like having a training period of like 6 months where you're like, look, you are the imam, but you need to have a training module. And here's some of the foundational things that you really need to know. And here's ways to do it. And I really hope that, inshallah, there are others with more experience, imams and those who have supported them for so many years, being able to develop something like this. Because as you said, so many communities do not have imams. And when you get an imam, it's kind of luck of the draw, just to phrase it colloquially, as to how that's going to turn out. And there have just been too many examples of communities that have been burned by unprepared imams, and unprepared imams have been burned by difficult communities. And with that in mind, what would your ending pieces of advice be, both for these newish imams and the communities who are welcoming these imams or receiving these imams, and communities that might feel a little aimless and directionless? There are people within that community who want to change things for the better.
Allah Mustaan. Maybe better than advice is directing them to where they can find advice superior to my own. I'm so happy to see initiatives like Forerunners, the Forerunners Consulting. We actually did our first ever strategic vision retreat at the masjid a few months ago with them. And they identified for us so much. I think if we would have tried to do this on our own, it would take another 5-10 years minimum to just come across the strategic initiatives that emerged out of that one weekend with them under their guidance.
Could you mention what Forerunners is for the audience, for people who may not know?
So Forerunners, I guess it's a consultancy that offers guidance and best practices to for-profits and nonprofits. The leadership was like a very successful, or several of them were very successful corporate leaders at Amazon, like government contracts division, and they led departments that were billions and billions of dollars. Budgeting, and they grew it, what I think it was something like 5x in 2 years or something. And then at the height of their careers, they said, we did this with our Islamic values. Like, we were informed by sort of Islamic principles. And so why are we doing this for bottom lines, for capital greed? Why not do this on our terms for Muslims or non-Muslims who see the value in Islamic principles. And so I see it as almost like the seed for what can be the equivalent of Harvard Business School, inshallah, from the Islamic value system and the Quranic worldview. And they're actually very intentional about that. I'm not just saying that, hopeful for the best. And so they offer training, mentorship, leadership for people, entrepreneurs with their startups, even networking opportunities. Mostly Muslims, obviously, are their clients, and also for nonprofits. And so I've been to some of their first summits, the Muslim higher education institutes, almost everyone you can think of was there. And then they did Masajid last summer, and like Muslim athletic leagues, institutions, organizations, get them all together to see how they can synergize as well. They're doing amazing work. You guys should look them up. They're obviously inspired by the Quranic sabiqun, right? Forerunners, sabiqun, that Allah mentions and praises and celebrates with al-Waqi'ah. And also Oak Tree. Oak Tree Institute was a project born of MAS, born of the Muslim American Society, and they're an independent organization now that offers leadership training and, to Zainab's point, servant leadership training. And they did some work, consultancy work for our masjid as well, from a distance, remotely. So I would advise anyone to just invest money in that. And if money is your concern, you'll make that back and more. And if money is not your concern, just give the bread to its baker, as our deen teaches us. And I've said earlier, concluding advice to the imams, what comes to mind just intuitively is Allah's ayah. And we made out of them, them here is Banu Israel. And we are obviously incentivized to be the ummah that has been distinguished above Banu Israel in general. We made out of them imams. This is the Quranic formula for imamship, if you will, in Allah's eyes. We made out of them imams, guiding by our command, lamma sabaru, when they persevered. It's the battle of patience, it truly is. When they were patient with the non-glamorous work, right? When they were patient with the trials, and they were certain in our signs. So, bisabri, that's how Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah framed it as well. Like through sabr, perseverance, resilience, stamina, and that needs to get replenished and everything else we said earlier, but through stamina, don't give up. And through yaqeen, maintaining your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not tokenizing or trivializing this work. This is the work of the prophets. This is the work of generations. It will all be worth it. Allah has in store for you that which doesn't fit in this world. So don't expect your appreciation, your acknowledgement, your reward to come in this world. Await it from nobody but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will give you the stamina. That'll keep you going. That'll get you to be a person of ihsan in your Islamic work. Make it ihsanic work, as they say. As-sabr wal yaqeen. If either of those bleeds, your ability to be an imam, most importantly, in the scales of Allah Azza wa Jal, they falter accordingly. They falter proportionately to our lack of sabr and our lack of yaqeen. And Allah knows best.
I really appreciate all the time that you've given to us today, all your stories, your insights. I think they're incredibly valuable for anyone who is in the community building space. Like I said, especially for smaller communities, it's rough out here. So we need all the advice that we can get. And may Allah reward you for all of your work and put barakah in this podcast and make it a means of benefit for all other folks in the same boat. And I pray that we are able to see a massive cultural shift in Muslim communities across non-Muslim lands, because Allah knows that we are truly struggling, but we also have so much potential that we just need to tap into, and we can do so much more, inshallah. So may Allah accept all of your efforts and make us all amongst those who are able to slowly but surely work for His sake to benefit the ummah for the sake of Allah alone.
Thanks for having me.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today. It was really enlightening.
Barakallah.
Hey everyone, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle Muslim Matters. And check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.